Thumbelina. There was a woman, very kind, who lived alone. While taking care of her garden, she found a mysterious seed and decided to plant it and see what plant would grow from it. The next day, a large and beautiful flower appeared, which looked like a tulip, but the leaves were very closed, as if they were a bud. When she looked closer, she saw an unusually small girl, in the center of the flower, looking down at her. Her height was not even half the length of a thumb, and so she was called Thumbelina. The woman took care of the little girl with great affection. A walnut shell was her cradle, violet leaves were her mattress, and her blanket was a rose petal. One night, when she was lying in her beautiful bed, behold, a scary old frog came and jumped out the window. The frog jumped straight onto the bed, where Thumbelina was sleeping. Thinking that she would make a fine wife for her son, she took Thumbelina away with her bed and all. There passed a large lake, but its banks were muddy and slippery, and the frog dwelt there with his son. The frog placed the walnut shell with Thumbelina on top of the water lily leaves. When the girl woke up and realized where she was, she began to cry desperately, for around the huge green leaf there was only a sea of waters, and it could not reach the land at all. The old frog beckoned to her, and said, "Here is my son, he will be your husband, and you will have a splendid life here in the swamp." Thumbelina sat there alone on the big leaf and wept, for she didn't like the idea of marrying that horrible frog. The little fish swimming underwater heard everything and regretted that she was being forced to marry. They gathered around the green stem that held the leaf, where the little one was, and gnawed at the stem with their sharp teeth, and so the leaf broke free and they carried it far away, where the frog could never reach it. While Thumbelina was sailing, a huge beetle appeared flying, and when he saw her, he immediately grabbed her by the waist and led her to a tree and said he would marry her. The girl was very scared and cried loudly, hearing the noise. The other beetles that lived in the tree were approaching to see what was happening. Realizing that the girl did not want to be there, the beetles' wives retracted their antennae and said, "Wow, she only has 2 legs. What a strange appearance. And she doesn't have any antenna," shouted another. She can't stay here." So, they flew down with it from the top of the tree, and deposited it on top of a daisy. They whispered softly to her that she would be safe there. All that summer poor Thumbelina lived alone in the huge forest. She wove for herself a bed of the grass, and hung it under a great leaf, that it might be sheltered from the rain. She gathered a little honey from the flowers for food, and drank the dew that fell from the leaves every day. Until winter came. It started to snow and she wrapped herself in a dry leaf, which wasn't enough to warm her up. She couldn't find food, and decided to go through the forest to look for shelter and food. With a lot of effort, she managed to reach the door of a rat's house, which lived inside a small hole in a tree. Seeing that little girl, the mouse felt sorry for her and let her in. He shared with her the food he had and proposed that she stay there all winter, but for that she needed to clean the house and cook. Thumbelina accepted the proposal and spent the winter in a more comfortable way. One day, the little mouse received a visit from her neighbor, Mr. Mole. Immediately, he was enchanted by the girl's appearance and wanted to marry her. Mr. Mole secretly promised the mouse that he would give her all his food supply if she convinced Thumbelina to marry him. The mouse began to advise the girl every day, saying that it was time for her to get married and praising Mr. Mole. But Thumbelina didn't want to marry a mole, let alone spend the rest of her life in a house underground, without seeing the sunlight. Despite this, the girl felt indebted to the little mouse and did not want to disappoint her. To buy time, she told Mr. Mole who would like to get married in spring, because she would make a wedding dress with rose petals. One morning, the little mouse asked the girl to bring some tea to Mr. Mole. As he passed through the tunnel that joined the two houses, Thumbelina found a swallow that looked as if it had died of the cold. She bent down, put the little wings that covered the swallow's head aside and said, "Perhaps it was you who sang to me so wonderfully over the summer," she thought. "It certainly gave me a lot of joy." Compassionate, she began to play earth on the little body of the bird, which chirped very softly. The swallow was not dead, she was just passed out, numb from the cold, and as she had been warmed, she came to life again. She made hot tea for the swallow and brought food and a blanket. "Thank you, my beautiful girl, you saved my life. Soon I will be able to fly around the world to feel the warmth of the sun. Oh, it's very cold outside. There is snow and ice everywhere. Stay here in your warm bed, and I'll take care of you." The swallow remained there all winter, and Thumbelina took good care of her. Neither the mouse nor the mole knew anything about this story, because they didn't like birds. As soon as spring arrived, the swallow felt strong enough to fly. Knowing that the wedding day was approaching, she suggested the girl to sit on her back, and they would fly away. But Thumbelina didn't want to hurt the mouse. The swallow flew to the sunny regions. Thumbelina watched her go with tears in her eyes. Every morning when the sun came up, and every afternoon when the sun went down, she would go to the door to look at the blue sky, and think how beautiful and pleasant the day was outside. Every night the mole paid him a visit, but she wasn't satisfied at all, because she didn't like him. Plucking up courage, Thumbelina told the mouse that she didn't want to get married. Furious, she said how ungrateful the girl was and threatened to bite her. Well, the wedding was going to take place. The wedding day arrived. The poor thing was very sad. She would have to say goodbye to the glorious sun now and live forever underground with Mr. Mole. As the ceremony began, a familiar chirp sounded above her head. She looked up. It was the swallow. Quickly, she landed and Thumbelina climbed onto her back, and together they flew high above the forest and sea, far beyond the giant mountains. Finally they arrived in another forest. "Your house is here," said the swallow. There were big, beautiful white flowers there. The swallow flew down with Thumbelina, and gently placed her on one of the broad leaves. In the middle of the flower was a little man. He had glittering wings on his shoulder, and he was not much bigger than the girl. In each of the flowers lived a small man or a small woman of that size. Thumbelina was delighted. She had found her place in the world. She told her story to all those people, as small as she was. She decided that from that day on, her name would be Sky, in honor of her friend who rescued her by flying through the sky. There, she didn't feel small, but part of a big family. But the greatest joy came when she realized that beautiful wings had grown on her back. Then the little man said to him, "We only have wings when we find our place." She was very happy there, and whenever she could, she visited her friend.
Hi friend, did you see me in the story? Rewind the video and look for me. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.